James Headley with the Living in Naples channel. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. As always, if you like what you see and find value in this, please do like, subscribe, and share. And of course, if you'd like to get in touch anytime, just drop me an email and I will be happy to respond to you as soon as possible. With that, let me start today's discussion with a little bit of a true confession. I actually always enjoyed math right up until the 8 a.m. calculus course, my first semester in college. And that was pretty much the end of it, with the exception of a couple of enjoyable probability and stats courses after that. But in any event, today's topic might seem a little dry on the surface. It is real estate math 101 and perhaps 102. But I think you'll find some of this very useful and appreciate you hanging in to learn about the kind of 6 general categories of real estate math here in Southwest Florida that I think might be useful to you. So without further ado, I'm going to switch over and spend quite a bit of time here just sharing my screen with you today so that you can get a sense of the numbers and follow along there. And as always, happy to talk with you about your personal situation and run some numbers that are specific to you at your convenience. So with that, let's dive right into the first category. Our first category is the investment or rental purchase decision. Basically, does it make sense to buy a home here as an investment? I'd encourage you to watch my video specifically talking about the short-term rental environment elsewhere on the channel. But in a more general sense, I think there are 2 key variables just as context that you should be thinking about when considering an investment/rental purchase. First is that obviously the opportunity cost of other investments, other places that you could be putting your money, and what that relative return looks like, both in financial terms as well as in lifestyle terms. And secondly, a big consideration, as we'll see as we get into these numbers here, is how much will you be financing? There are certainly exceptions, but finding cash flow positive properties with heavy leveraging and the resulting high mortgage payments just isn't the norm here in Southwest Florida. So it's a matter of how much are you willing to essentially lose on any given year to build the equity and have that potential for obviously price appreciation, but also the eventual or ongoing personal use of the home. That's really the decision. So as we look at just a couple of examples, I wouldn't say they're at the far ends of the spectrum, but they're certainly representative and give you a little bit different taste here. As we look at a waterfront home, a canal, basically home with boating access on Marco, as well as a fairly typical condo here in Naples, called the average condo. As you can see, purchase price for the Marco home is going to be roughly $1.5 million, and for that condo, $450,000, with a 20% down payment on both to avoid PMI, and a mortgage run today at a 3% interest rate. So you can see your annual figures here, taxes and insurance, ballpark estimates in both cases. Your HOA, which you won't have one on Marco, but you will have in the Naples condo. This might be toward the higher end, but certainly in the mid-range, if not at the higher end of that mid-range for many condos here in Naples. The trade-off of not having an HOA is you do have to take care of the lawn, pool, etc. On Marco on your own. You won't have any of those costs, those maintenance costs here in Naples. But as we run down, you can see that the annual expense total on Marco is nearly $80,000, a little over $30,000 in Naples. Your rental income on Marco on this type of home, just to be conservative, you can expect around maybe $70,000. In Naples, $27,000, $28,000, again, probably at the conservative end. So your net loss on an annual basis on Marco is going to be about a little over $9,000, and in Naples, a little over $2,500. So jump ahead 10 years. The equity that you now have on that Marco home is approaching $600,000. In Naples, it's a little over $175,000. So big picture, you've spent about $100,000 to get $288,000 in equity in Marco, and you've spent $31,000 to get $86,000 in additional equity in Naples. So is it worth it for you ultimately? Again, depends on your personal situation, where else you might be looking at investing the money. how much you would like to use that home in the short run or down the line, and I'll return to that in another category as well. But basically, you've got some considerations here to take into account before you make that call. That brings us to category number 2, and that's the aforementioned decision about whether or not to use your getaway home, your rental or investment property as a getaway home. As you can see from our examples from category 1, if you're going to use your home in the high season, late winter, early spring, and it's this Marco sample home here, you might be looking at losing $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 or more dollars for that month in terms of the rental income that you're going to forego by using it yourself. In Naples, that number's probably more in the $5,000 to $6,000 range. But on a percentage basis, you can see that you're definitely giving up a fair amount. So in essence, you're paying yourself, or you're paying out of your own proceeds for the use of that home. So the question is, is that vacation time worth it to you? How much is that vacation time worth it to you? And are you willing to forego that rental income? And can you forego that rental income depending upon your situation? If you were, just to keep in mind, if you're willing to visit your Southwest Florida home in, say, November or December or even May, that hit is going to be significantly less. So it really does come down to those trade-offs for you. With that said, let's turn to category number 3 in our real estate math, and that is the question of whether or not you should dole out a considerable amount for an initiation fee in a community, or one-time fees to purchase in a community. So using 2, again, hypothetical examples here, but fairly representative. If we look at a community that is going to have a $65,000 upfront initiation fee versus, say, one with a $7,500 upfront fee. You look at home prices, typically, not always, but typically in some of these higher initiation fee communities versus those with the lower or no one-time fees. You probably pay a little bit of a premium for the lower fees, or you pay, if you want to think about it, you pay a discounted price for those homes in the community with the higher initiation fees, simply because not everyone is willing to or able to put out that money on the front end for whatever amenities are being offered within that community. So looking at that, with basically a 50% discount here, or 66, depending upon how you want to look at this, or 50% premium for these homes. Again, and even in this example, let's look at a higher annual dues structure for that community with the higher initiation fee, assuming that they are offering more in terms of amenities, and that's a reason behind a rationale for this higher initiation fee. If we run this out to after 5 years, what will you have actually paid in each of these communities? If you're looking at the 5th year in that community with the higher initiation fee, with your initiation fee, your home price, and your annual dues and taxes, you're looking at whether that difference in what you've outlaid being about $100,000 less still. Run it out to year 10. Now it starts to get a little tighter, but we're still talking about $60,000 in difference here, and it takes us out. We have to get out to year 18 of ownership before you get to the point where, crude calculations. We're not talking about time value of money, etc. But where home number 1 with the higher initiation fee actually is costing you in air quotes that you can't see here, more than that home in the low initiation fee community. So if you're looking at these numbers, it's really, you can look at these a number of different ways, but you might say you're getting a deal on the home in the higher initiation fee community for those 18 years, or if your horizon is definitely longer than that, maybe it's worth paying more for the house without the high initiation fee up front. But ultimately, it's about the community, it's about what you enjoy, and the point is that the math isn't always about the dollar signs. It can be that you're going to enjoy this community a lot more, or you may enjoy this community a lot more. But the point is not to necessarily dismiss a community out of hand because of those high initiation fees, without really looking into the numbers and doing an apples to apples comparison to what you might be able to get somewhere else. With that said, let's turn to our fourth major category, and that's looking at purchasing in an HOA community in general, regardless of what those fees look like, versus a non-HOA. And there are intangible costs and benefits to be considered here as well, in terms of the uniformity / conformity question, what your neighbors can do and can't do, and if they're going to be intrusive or not, if you're an intrusive neighbor or not. All of those factors go into play when you're looking at an HOA versus a non-HOA community. But just in a very rough sense here, to thinking about the numbers, it's one thing to know that you have these dues of $7,500 a year in an HOA community, but just some basic calculations. It's not quite $7,500 to zero when you start to factor in the things that you have to pay for in that non-HOA community, in terms of your maintenance, in terms of your amenities that you're not getting in a non-HOA community. So rather than $7,500 to zero, maybe it's more like $7,500 to $3,000, $3,500, $4,000, whatever the case may be. Again, probably the intangibles need to come into play here and be weighed even a bit more than in some of our other categories, but just keep in mind some of those numbers that you may not see necessarily on the surface. That brings us to our fifth category, and that's the CDD, the Community Development District. As I've referenced in other videos, this is really what the developer, how the developer finances the building out of the infrastructure and the ongoing maintenance within a community. So the street lights, the streets themselves, the fill, etc. So in many communities, you're going to have an outstanding balance on a CDD. I've just used a real example here from a community, fairly representative, but years in, decades in, as the case may be, there's still a balance on a particular home with the CDD here of a little over $11,000, and the annual debt service on that, or the payment on that outstanding capital balance, as you can see, is about $1,300. There are 13 years left on that. So the total that you'd pay over the next 13 years for that would be just about $17,000, with the total interest that you're outlaying being about $5,600 and change. Interest per year, $434 and change. So your implied interest is a little under 4%. I've seen much more egregious examples and implied interest rates being closer to double digits. So the moral of the story is, if you know, or you should definitely find out if there is a CDD, and factor that into your calculations and think about the potential for paying that off at closing or soon after closing, as the case may be, and as your financial circumstances allow. In most cases, it does tend to be a better option to pay off the CDD up front or as soon as you can, and just avoid those charges. That brings us to the last of the real estate math categories that I wanted to discuss today, and that's the decision whether or not to join a golf community, or as the case may be, to buy in a bundled golf community, for example. Plunking down that initiation fee can hurt, but really, what are the costs over time? Taking a look at that. So just using some fairly real numbers here. Let's say that your initiation for golf is $40,000. So obviously, if you join, that's what you're putting down. If you don't join a golf club, you're not going to pay any initiation fee. But this is for golfers. Obviously, if you don't play golf, none of these numbers come into play. But if you join, typically you're going to pay about $26 each time you go out and play as a member. If you don't join, $100. Clearly, that's still going to be at the lower end in season. But if you're playing throughout the year, maybe it averages out to about $100 a round. Seems like a very reasonable number given the figures here. So if you look at the rounds per year per person, if you're playing once a week, clearly after year one, you're coming out ahead if you didn't join that club. If you play twice a week, you're still coming out ahead, maybe not quite as much on a percentage basis. If you're playing 3 times a week, you're still $30,000 ahead as a non-joining member, as a non-member of the club. throw in another 20 rounds, get to that 175, roughly every other day, a little less than every other day, you're still coming out quite a bit ahead. So if we run that out and we go to look at year 3, that once a week golfer is still going to be doing much better, just in pure financial terms. Forget about the hassle of getting tee times, etc. But you're still coming out about $30,000 ahead. The twice a week golfer is still coming out $17,000 ahead after 3 years, and that 3 times a week golfer, it's getting a little closer, but you're still $5,000 and change ahead. And that's for a single golfer. Now, if you look at as a couple joining, and if you're both playing once a week, you're still coming out ahead as non-members. If you get up to twice a week, already joining becomes a better proposition from a financial in a financial sense. If you get up to the 3 times a week, it becomes a significantly better proposition than going out and paying those greens fees each time you go out. Returning to the case of the single golfer, just to complete the discussion, that single golfer after 5 years, if they're playing once a week, they're still coming out ahead by $20,000 and change. If they're playing twice a week, it's roughly a push. And clearly, the more you play, as you can see from these numbers, the more the more you're going to pay, and the more quickly that initiation fee starts to pay for itself and then some over time. And as I said, particularly if you're a couple who plays frequently, you can see that those numbers really do start to add up, and the savings are there for you as a member of a club. So with that said, I appreciate you joining me today. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to share some of this real estate math with you. As I said, I'd be happy to discuss any of this with you live at your convenience. Well, that brings us to the end of this discussion about real estate math here in Southwest Florida. As always, I'd be happy to discuss your personal situation and help to discuss some numbers with you, put you in touch with experts as well here locally to help. But in any event, I hope this general introduction has been beneficial to you. As always, if you like what you see, please do share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and of course, like the videos as well. Thanks so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.